Hello again. So, at the beginning of the pandemic, still talking COVID here, um, got a lot of talk about, the doctors agree with what they're telling you to do. Do what the doctors say, etc. Now, many doctors just followed what they were told. They didn't actually research into it. Lots of doctors who researched into it started questioning what was being said to be done, and they were immediately made pariahs on social media and all this other stuff. So basically, I want to talk about hospitalization today and sort of what happened in the hospitals and what we learned from the hospitals and what they didn't tell us about the hospitals. So early on, early data, 100 people were hospitalized, 3 of them died, 3% death rate or something like that. I'm making up numbers here. Now, 3% doesn't sound like much, except for there are over 7 trillion people in the world, and this is apparently spreading to be a worldwide thing. So 3% of 7 trillion is a large number. Nowhere near that many died. So here's what happened. A bunch of people got COVID. We're going to only count the ones that went to the hospital. So this 3% suddenly overinflated just because we're not counting everyone who has the disease. We're only counting the ones who went to the hospital. So if 1 in 50 went to the hospital, which is a low number, then our 3% drops down to like 0.06%. And we don't have tests for it yet. We don't have also, even saying 1 in 50 went to the hospital is wrong because we don't know how this is spreading. We weren't talking asymptomatic people here, so it ends up a lot more people had COVID than we were counting when we came up with this number. Now, in the end, when we started keeping updates on everything, and you'd turn on the news and they'd have all the sidebar, so many reported cases and so many deaths and all this, they were starting to give real numbers after a few months. But initially, we started with these phony numbers, got this excessive death rate, and for some reason we wanted to hold on to this high death rate. And we might not keep saying 3%, might not be doing that, but we still kept acting like this ridiculously high death rate was going to happen. So we started giving correct numbers, but our response was still to the original numbers, which was a ridiculously overinflated death rate. Never got around to correcting that. Got a friend who worked in the hospital, actually worked in the COVID ward. Now, they would go home at night. They acted like there was a zombie apocalypse going on. Go to work, go back home to their bunker, not say anything. And they would actually ask you, how can you be so cavalier about going out and doing all this? You're going shopping and you're not afraid of getting COVID, and you actually want restaurants to open up and people are. And the answer is, well, people going to the hospitals are the worst of the worst cases, and this is what you're seeing, and this is your representation of what COVID is. Us living in the real world, we don't see all this. Hospital ward holds 20 to 25 people. I don't know. Again, making up numbers, don't know. Don't. It varies from hospital to hospital. So you're seeing these same 25 people lingering from the disease over and over and over again. Meanwhile, month or two, hospital stay is going to be, or even longer. So you're seeing the same 25 people, worried about them, I see maybe 25 people, 25 new cases a week. They go home, they get over it, they go back to work. So, yeah, my point of view is that it's not as dangerous as you think it is because I'm seeing the real world numbers, you're seeing the special cases. So when we talk about, oh, all the doctors say, well, the doctors have this biased view where they see the worst of the worst that they sort of assume, or some of them at least, sort of assume that this is what everyone's going through. Now, I asked my friend, because we had, of course, the elderly were considered the high risk group at first. And then the hospital started kicking them out because they didn't want people dumping the elderly there. And so, yeah. I said in an original video, I put up with a lot of the shenanigans because I have respect for the elderly. And then everyone stopped respecting the elderly. And so this is one of the reasons why I'm really against all the COVID nonsense is the double talk is hurting the wrong people. So anyway, I asked, we all heard that the elderly are high risk. Are there any other high risk groups? Which, yes, there were. I'm going to go over that in another video probably. But I was told the majority of the cases were over 100 pounds overweight. This was something. Diabetes was put in, people with diabetes are in a high risk group, we were told publicly. It's not unusual for diabetics to have be overweight, although not all of them are. But no one came out and said being overweight put you in a high weight risk group. Although, according to what my friend who worked in the hospital says, apparently it did. Never saw a doctor come out and say, hey, you know what? Maybe if you ate better food and exercised more, you'd be at a lower rate of, lower risk at COVID. Wear a mask. Get the shot. Do this, do that. Don't take care of your basic health. Everyone liked to compare the United States to Europe, and look, they've got lockdowns going on, and they're doing all this COVID protection stuff, and their rates are lower than ours. What no one pointed out was Europeans are generally a little more health conscious than Americans. Yes, we've got people who like to jog and stuff like that, but we do have our health nuts, but for the most part, we aren't as health conscious as the rest of the world are. So pointing to Europe and saying, look, it's the lockdowns which did it all. Nah, not really. No one likes to talk about Sweden anymore. Sweden at one point just said, we don't care about this anymore. We're going to get on with our lives. And they didn't suddenly have a skyrocketing COVID rate or anything like that. And it's because the Swedish are more health conscious than most people. And so, yes, it wasn't as big a threat to them. But doctors didn't want to come out and say this. They had all sorts of advice except for take care of your basic health needs. Now, I mentioned back when I talked about masking and people, they never told us the proper way to dispose of a mask, and so we found them laying on the ground. And one of the places in town where I saw them most just lying on the ground was outside the local hospital. My office did support work for the hospital, so I saw, I knew for a fact that they had strict standards of masking and everything inside the hospital. The staff didn't care for this that much, and it was obvious. You'd actually see hospital staff dropping their mask on the ground when they left the hospital. You'd hear them complaining about having to wear masks. These weren't all doctors, but they were, again, hospital staff, people who should have been more up with what was going on, should have been better educated. You're working around sick people during a pandemic. I would expect they would have more training courses for you. So if you can't convince the hospital staff that this stuff is necessary, why do you expect to convince the rest of the world? No, then, like I said, they had strict standards. Yeah, every time I went to the hospital, I'd have to wear a mask and go through all the rigmarole because that was their standards. Then I'd go home and they'd be having an interview on the news with a doctor in his office, in person. This isn't a Zoom meeting, so they got the cameraman and the reporter in there doing the interview, and he's not wearing a mask. So again, why should I worry about this stuff when obviously the people who supposedly, oh, doctors are all for this stuff, turn on the nightly news and apparently not. So yeah, that's it. Lots going on in the hospitals. What was going on in the hospitals completely contradicted what we were being told, and the idea that all doctors were on board with this. No, a lot of doctors weren't on board with it. They were just not, afraid to step out and say anything about it. They might lose their job. They might, be canceled on social media. Whatever is wrong, they're afraid of. They just didn't want to tell the truth, which was, we really don't have the facts to do all this stuff. Yes, there are certain generic risks or generic protocols you go through when there is a sickness out there. I will admit that. But over time, should we continue doing this when there's obviously no benefit or lack of benefit to? And doctors, like I said, I think if they felt free to speak loudly, the pandemic would have been over, or the response to the pandemic would have been a lot less over time. But I believe they were afraid to say what was on their mind. The people who saw this day to day, they either weren't telling us basic health ideas will help you, good health practices, stop eating junk food all the time, get more exercise. No one came out and said, this will prevent you from getting COVID, or this will lessen the effect of COVID. I would have believed them a lot more if the government had said, hey, eat better and get more exercise, because doctors will support this blindly. A lot of doctors would support it blindly, but that's because of years of experience where eating better and getting exercise is good for you in general. So why wouldn't it be better for you when a pandemic's going on? I don't know. But the government didn't do this. The doctors didn't stand up and say to do this. So the whole argument, well, doctors support this, I don't buy. I believe a lot of doctors were cowed into silence because what I saw going on in hospitals was a complete opposite of what was going on in the real world with the pandemic. That's it. Like I said, there were some serious cases, and yes, the people who were hospitalized were more likely to die. Oh yes, I mentioned the whole, what is it? Earlier video about, oh yeah, people going to the hospital with car accidents and testing positive, so they're reported as a COVID death, or attempted suicide, but they had COVID, so we're going to call it a COVID death. Hospitals didn't jump up and say, hey, you're twisting the data. Doctors didn't want to get up and, didn't want to come up and say this, even though, it was families of the people who died who said, wait a second, here's the information you really need. So again, hospitals and the doctors and all the other stuff did a good job, took some risks. I'll give them credit, but none of them wanted to risk their job enough to say, wait a second, this fringe guy who says that things aren't so bad, he's actually a little right. We shouldn't be demonizing him. We shouldn't be making him a pariah. We should actually be looking at him and saying, maybe this should be looked into a little more closely. But no, none of them wanted to. You know, so that's it. Like I said, even the experts aren't always experts. Have a nice day.